Yeah, you know,
Exactly. Exactly. So we are being recorded. Which will all be edited out when we get this shaped up and put on the website. But I did just want to let you know that we're in recording. And our host, who is Robert Tulip, we operate off of his Zoom account, is tied up in another meeting, but he's going to manage. And then we've given the share is open for your colleague from Florida to share the slide deck. So you'll be working with him. I think it's Brian, right? And you'll be working with him to advance the slides when you're ready to do that. We're gonna. It's 2:27 now. We all came on a little bit early. I'm gonna wait. And
I know. Yes, it's interesting. I can't tell how many people are on, or I only see your photo, your picture, and mine. I don't know. That's fine. Just that's good, so actually.
Far, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 so far. Robert is. When they show up, Robert gets a notification in the holding the waiting room, and then he lets them in. So I imagine that they will be joining. So we'll give it, probably give it 5 minutes to make sure everybody's on, and then we'll begin.
Got it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Bruce. How are you? Are you in
90
a car?
degrees. 90 degrees, thanks. Look at that sky.
Yeah, gotta love it. Okay, here comes.
I'm going to be on mute and no video for a little bit, but I'll be listening.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
There's Brian. Here we go. Hi, Brian.
Hello, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking over the slides. I tried to multitask a couple of weeks ago, and it was moderating and slide and everything else. I would say a multitask failure.
Understandable. I'll need you to make me co-host.
Let's see. That is, I am not the Zoom platform, so I'll send a chat to our platform host, but he's enabled the share for you to share the slide.
I've got it. We're good.
Okay. Good.
Yep.
Great. He's the one multitasking today. He's on another meeting as well as he's activated the recording, and he is monitoring the waiting room for folks that are coming in. Great.
Gotcha.
Good, we're filling up. It's 2:30 now. I'm going to give it 2 more minutes, and then we're going to proceed.
Hi, Rafe. Sid is trying to get on.
Oh, good. Hi,
Sid
Linda.
was on. Did we lose him?
That was my sister-in-law from California.
Oh, hi.
And her husband. Well, it's been snowing on and off here in the mountains of West Virginia today.
I mean, we're having thunderstorms here. We hardly ever have thunderstorms. It cannot make up its mind.
Y'all heard that it was 90 in Austin, right?
Yeah, you just reported that one. When I was in Austin in January, it was just as cold there as it had been in Sacramento. It was crazy. Your weather is
kind of normal for us.
Um, I didn't realize I wasn't on mute. Hi, everybody. I just saw Kim Ross on here, and I haven't seen her on an HPAC meeting before.
Well,
Okay, well, good morning, good evening, Suzanne.
you, Dennis.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask everybody. Good. It's 2:32. I'm going to ask everyone to please put your name and affiliation in the chat because I think we have a few too many newcomers to do a round robin on verbal introduction. So please put your name and affiliation in the chat, and for fun, what country you're in. And okay. We are already recording, for those of you who get nervous about that. And we're going to begin. So I am going to introduce myself because not everybody knows me. I'm Suzanne Reed. I'm a member of the steering circle of the Healthy Planet Action Coalition. Several of my colleagues who are members of the HPAC steering circle are also on with us today. If you're not a regular member of HPAC, and either now or after listening to this conversation want to be part of the Google group that receives notifications of our meeting, please just put your email in chat and we will subscribe you to the Google group. Rafe has asked me, we're very grateful and appreciative to have Rafe return to HPAC for a presentation the second time with us. And I have put his biography in the notification, so I'm not going to go after read it here. But Rafe has been a key figure in the environmental movement and environmental public policy development since the 1960s. I'm going to date him because I date back to the 1960s too. So I'll share that with you. And he has some colleagues that have joined, some friends and colleagues that have joined with him today. So I'm going to just ask him to introduce who they are. And then Brian Lee is going to be sharing the slide deck for Rafe. But before I turn it over to Rafe, he did ask me to say something about HPAC, and I will in a few minutes put our website in the chat so you can access it there and get a little bit more information. But we've been around for about 3 years. We are committed to climate change solutions that go beyond just emissions reduction and carbon removal. We are very interested in incorporating cooling methods into the global climate policy solution framework. And so we advocate on behalf of a program which is three-pronged to cool the earth through a variety of measures that are in development now, as well as reduce emissions and remove carbon. So we have several papers and our position statement on the website explaining in more detail what our platform is. And I'm going to turn it over to Rafe. We just recently launched an advocacy program to make people more aware of the crisis that we're in and be more attuned to expanding the portfolio of solutions that are being applied to averting climate change. Rafe was in that meeting and mentioned the work that he's doing in setting a goal for ocean sea level rise. And people were very excited to hear about that and hear more about it today, where that will be the focus of our conversation. So Rafe, you want to introduce your friend and colleagues and
Sure.
Take it away.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thanks for the chance to come back a second time. I'm not sure I know everybody who's on. I invited a number of people. First, Kim Ross and Brian Lee, at least from Rethink Energy Florida. They are the two leaders who this upper limit the sea level rise project. I have worked with them for a long time to develop this, and they are here. I'm delighted. I don't know if there's anyone else from Rethink. Anybody else?
See anybody else?
No. Okay. There's Kim. Say, I saw a colleague of mine, famous novelist on the subject of geoengineering, Sam Bleacher, who I've known for a very long time. I think, Kim, you need to go on the stop video, I think. But then Sam is on and very interested in this topic. I think a couple of important relatives are on. My wife, I think, Lenore is on, and my sister-in-law, Linda Liebes, and her husband, Sid, from the Bay Area, long-time environmentalist, very long time. And so I'm pleased by that. Those are the people I know who have joined. There might be others, I just don't know. So if anybody wants to chime in, that's fine.
Okay. We welcome you all.
Okay, so let's begin, shall we? And normally slides are a little, well, we'll see. The slides should take us topic by topic, and we'll go see how it goes. So here is the organization from which this idea of an upper limit to sea level rise is based in Tallahassee. As I mentioned, Kim and Brian are two of the leaders. And you can see its mission, this statement there. And they have extremely good connections around the state in the legislature and a lot of experience in promoting renewable energy and a range of other, well, you can see there, youth education, adult engagement, and community organizing. They're based in Tallahassee. So they organize our biweekly meetings of few of us who strategize together. So we'll go on. This next slide should be a bit of a surprise. Brian and I worked hard to get this up. Brian, thank you. I'm sure most of you don't know who Gordon MacDonald is. If you do, terrific. But Gordon was an important historic figure for me. He was a very prominent geophysicist back in the 70s and 80s, an original member of the U.S. Council on Environmental Quality under Richard Nixon, which is a White House office. Gordon was a very prominent scientist. And the year before this, in 78, he chaired a summer session with a group of physicists that meets every summer called the Jasons to do kind of a modeling effort on CO2. And the conclusions of the Jason group were quite similar to those that have stood the test of time. But the important thing, there are two important. Gordon became, when I first heard of it, when I first got into the issue in 1979, there was an article in the Rocky Mountain News about his presentation on the Jason group results. I called him up. I said, will you talk to me? We spent 2 hours. I said, if I set up the briefings, will you do them? Because I'm not a scientist. I was not into the climate change issue. I was an air pollution lobbyist in the Congress, acid rain, air pollution. And when I read a little reference to the climate change problem in an EPA report, then I heard about Gordon. And we spent a lot of time together, many years together in a partnership, trying to bring policymakers along on the issue. And this photo, I know Suzanne circulated that New York Times Magazine article. If you look sort of midway through the article, this photo is there. And I'm trying to remember, it was a popular magazine that printed it, the photo, and there is Gordon. See, he was an early sea level rise person. His hand is where, I guess, with a loss of good chunk of Antarctica, that's where sea level rise will be. And he is standing on the west front of the US Capitol. And the photo made it into this very popular magazine. So that was an early effort at bringing the public along. But Gordon was a great partner for many, many years, and very important figure. He's no longer alive, but I wanted to, because of this photo and its relationship to sea level rise, I wanted to share it. So we'll continue. Brian. Okay, so how do we know sea level rise is happening, really? These are some photos of blue sky flooding in Florida, in Hollywood in 2022. As you all know, blue sky flooding is when the coastal, for example, the coast of Florida or towns or cities flood substantially when there's no storm, no wind, just a high tide with the extra tide from sea level rise. And more and more blue sky flooding. It's actually sort of a predicted phenomenon now, and it's happening more frequently. So it's a signal that the sea level rise problem is on. Okay, keep going. All right, so here's a definition sort of the broadest definition. What we decided to do is to call for an upper limit for sea level rise. Initially, we said the state of Florida should have its own upper limit, and because its viability is on the line. And of course, Florida can't achieve such an upper limit by itself, but it could contribute with its policies affecting statewide emissions, and it could become an advocate nationally and internationally, because to survive the decades ahead, it's going to be a requirement to get, as you'll see, emissions way down from where they're headed and where they are in order to slow the rate of sea level rise. So we thought that Florida, being as vulnerable as it is, would be kind of an ideal place to get this started, because the problem is so obvious, so big, and so much is at stake. We'll continue here. Before I run through this list here, this a word about strategies. That the strategy here is that I'll back up a second. The only global metric to success on climate change that we have is the global temperature. And it has a limitation that it doesn't mean much to populations, non-policy making populations or non-expert populations. It doesn't convey completely the urgency of the problem. So the strategy here is thinking we should think about having another metric to evaluate progress, success, and goals. And it's a metric that means a lot to, I suppose, billions of people around the world, which is sea level rise. And everybody understands, or it's very much easier to understand what sea level rise will do to vulnerable populations than the global temperature, which is a bit abstract. It's not that the global temperature number isn't important and critical, and the world, policymakers understand it globally, but it doesn't draw it. It's not as powerful as it might be in driving action at many levels of society. So the strategy is to it was really, it derives from something that I've been involved in for a long time called the climate impact strategy, which the idea was to use the impacts on a local basis to drive policy. And sea level, this is what this effort is about. And so this list here is to answer the question, well, what is the upper limit to sea level rise? You can't actually stop sea level rise, certainly in the short run, multi-decadal, unless we have some cooling technology that is springs forth or is one of the ones that's being examined and is implemented globally. But that's a long ways off and kind of very problematic. So, but what so we set out to define an upper limit, which is to lower the rate of sea level rise to a minimum. When you'll see later on, you'll see some graphs, scenarios of sea level rise under different emissions scenarios. So that's number one. So we can affect the rate and magnitude of sea level rise. Second, in that context, to establish goals for future decades, so that we can judge progress and judge how kind of whether governments are responding sufficiently to get sea level rise rates down to the minimum with the lowest magnitude. Third, this is becoming bigger all the time, which is to minimize the risk of disintegration of the ice sheets, Greenland and Antarctica, as many of you know very well. Both Greenland and Antarctica, particularly West Antarctica, are deteriorating, disintegrating, losing ice mass in greater amounts every year. And both Greenland and Antarctica, of course, has a lot more ice, but will contribute multiple meters of sea level rise over time unless we get these ice sheets stabilized. And one of the problems is if we wait too long, then there's no time to stabilize at least portions of West Antarctica, for example, which could be 10 feet if all the West Antarctic glaciers go. So, and what I wonder about, I'd really like to hear opinions on this, is it's almost like a poster child situation, if that's the right term, where the world has to come together to save Greenland and Antarctica to avoid catastrophe. And the specificity of Greenland and Antarctica and its linkage to the fate of coastal zones around the world might be enough to move people, at least move them a lot faster than they have. That's just a speculation. But I mean, it's kind of like the world has to do this. Okay, the final point here, of course, is the importance. We're going to get substantial amount of sea level rise no matter what. So resilience planning is key in all locations that are vulnerable. And that's going to require a lot of expertise and time and money to build resilience, not only here, but ultimately around the world. So that's, I think I said, yes, I've said this second metric issue is an important part of this. Okay, we keep going here. Here, we've been active. We haven't sort of broken through in the media as much as we would like, but we've been at it. And you can see here on the left was a piece written by Alice Hill, a colleague of mine from the Council on Foreign Relations, and I, that was not the, well, it's almost the first anniversary that it was in Foreign Affairs. You can see that on the left. The second piece was stimulated. I gave a presentation to, what was it, Broward County Sierra Club. There was a reporter there from the National Geographic who found the idea provocative and interesting. She wrote that piece. And the other one I write, or others of our group author pieces for, op-ed pieces. And the one on the right there is an example of something that appeared in the Palm Beach Post. But obviously, climate change issue is getting, orders of magnitude more coverage than it used to. The question for this campaign on sea level rise is if it is indeed a useful idea and important, can it attract a lot more interest from the media? It kind of awaits whether governments would embrace it. Okay, we keep going. So this is a little bit more about the vulnerability of Florida, why its viability is at stake. You would think that this would be a central issue for the government of Florida, which it is not. And that in a way, the tragedy is you have three leading I'm going to make a nonpartisan comment here. The three leading politicians in Florida, the governor, DeSantis, the former president, and the senator who is the chairman of the Republican Senate Campaign Committee, are essentially all climate deniers. DeSantis has a little streak of interest, but in particular, Rick Scott, who is a senator, was governor for 2 terms, and essentially he banned the use of the term climate change during his 8 years in office. Now, this is in Florida, mind you, where its future is at stake. And so our thought is that eventually, which is maybe a pipe dream, but the politics of this issue in Florida have to change. I think things are happening because insurance companies are pulling out. You know, we see when you get one of these more intense hurricanes, you get tremendous damages. And you can see here that these are some of the effects: flooding disruptions, sewer overflow, drinking water infiltration, property loss, water and sewer systems,
Anything else?
shorelines, and so on.
So
Okay.
Well, would you like to see the figures that I'm not?
View
Somebody's got to get on mute. Is that Linda?
No, she wasn't doing it. No.
Mute? Everybody on mute? Okay, somebody's voice is in the back. All right, we'll keep going here. All right, so here's one more specific estimate of the damages at different levels of sea level rise. It's homeowner damages in Florida. And you can see that there's actually this particular estimate, if you go from 6 billion at 1 foot, which we're at, to 26 billion, which is supposed to be about 2050, you can see that the damages quadruple with a doubling of the amount of sea level rise. And then it goes on from there, and you see that you get to these enormous numbers over time. That's from a work of the Union of Concerned Scientists called Underwater Report. Now, I want to say a word here. I think this is appropriate. As we move forward with this campaign, we found that we thought it might be appealing to other states in the United States as a place to start. So I wouldn't say that we haven't convinced the governors of states to jump in or the senators yet, but that we're in the beginning. But think of a place like Massachusetts. Or you can think, if you're from another country here, you could think of governments, regional governments, provinces that are highly vulnerable that this might have some appeal to. And in the United States, we thought about Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a city of Boston. It has the coastline north and south of Boston. It has 2 big islands, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, and it's one of its treasures is Cape Cod. Huge stakes for Massachusetts. And yet it doesn't have a goal. Nobody has a goal. Nobody has a limit. Another place that has enormous vulnerability is Virginia, where the Tidewater area is extremely vulnerable. That includes Chesapeake Bay, Potomac River, very low lying. Once again, a huge naval infrastructure there, and it's all highly vulnerable. So, but the point here is that other locations could take this on, define for themselves a limit, become advocates for it, share it with other governments. The second Biden administration could have an upper limit on sea level rise as part of their second term agenda, which would give clarity to why we're trying to, make the revolution in technology that has coming through the Inflation Reduction Act. All right, we'll keep going. Well, here I've got 2 more slides. these, one is from NOAA, the other is from the IPCC. They just indicate there's a lot of scenarios out there, but you see here, this first one is sea level rise under different emission scenarios. So the low one, what you get by 2050, and then you can see the high. There's a lot of scenarios out there, but they essentially say the message that if you don't get a handle on this, you get enormous amounts of sea level rise over time, and you get committed to those at much earlier dates because of the amount of warming that is put into the oceans and atmosphere. There's just the equilibrium of melting ice and thermal expansion of the ocean, the two major causes, just as we all know, commits us to much higher numbers. There are some. We were trying to get the graph that shows the big jump if you assume disintegration of portions of the West Antarctic ice sheet in the 21st century. Brian and I, we couldn't find it. I know it's there, but this one is a NOAA, which has a very good technical report issued in 2022 that estimates sea level rise. And the last slide, I think, is the IPCC estimate, and you can see that under different scenarios and over different timetables, you get highly, catastrophic changes at sea level at the high end, and very, very costly, even at some of the lower scenarios. So, but they're interesting. They help clarify what the future looks like. Now, just to make a final comment here, the question for HPAC and others is how we had a really good discussion last week on that the strategy is to avoid tipping points, and tipping points are fine, but they're not specific. There's so many of them. What are we talking about? We're talking about a tipping point, and sea level rise could be a central focus of such a strategy. In other words, imagine takes me, I was a State Department employee for 6 years. I was a US negotiator. Imagine that the island states bring this issue into the conference of the party. And all of a sudden, the amount of future sea level rise, the specific numbers, become kind of a focus, and therefore a global focus of the future. Okay, you don't see, at least my impression is, we don't see, it's all indirect through the temperature metric. But if you were to say, okay, how much sea level rise and what are its consequences for every one of these locations, to the extent that it hasn't happened, it might dramatize the whole crisis that we're in, to stimulate a lot more activity because of the clarity that we'll see what's to come. So that's my presentation. Thank you. Maybe there's a discussion out there.
I certainly expect there to be. So we're going to use the raised hand icon, and I'm going. First of all, thank you, Rafe. That was great and very stimulating. And I know that lots of people here will have lots to say. So I'm going to start with Mike McCracken, and we'll take it from there.
Hi, Rafe. Very interesting. I have two points to raise. One, there was the Massachusetts versus EPA legal case was decided based on an issue of sea level rise, that the federal government has to do it. That the idea was that when the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts joined the Union, it changed, it turned over responsibility for protecting its land to the federal government. And was it Justice Stevens, sort of in his decision, talked about, if it's taking an inch, it's taking a mile. So it's United States government responsibility to take that on. And EPA was ordered to take it on. That was Massachusetts. So you mentioned them as another state, but Florida and Massachusetts might be interesting to go back and sort of talk about that and get an evaluation of, is enough being done. So there is that as sort of a potential legal route that you might take and raise that as an issue, given it's already had a Supreme Court decision on it.
Yeah, yeah.
The second point I just want to ask is about your choice of saying sea level. That sort of talks about what it is under normal conditions or something. And really what you're worried about is sort of, well, in the normal situation, high tide inundation, and then storm surges and inundation. And if you're gonna, and because of the low slope of Florida, inundation can go a lot further than what happens with just normal sea level rise. And so I guess I'm wondering if sea level is the right metric to be thinking about. Is peak tide or something something else? Is amount of inundation something to think about? I'm just wondering if sea level is really the right thing to be thinking about. I don't know, but just a thought.
Okay. I'm hopeful that as we go along, we'll get better and better, more precise or more effective definitions or descriptions of what we're talking about. And my friends from Florida here, from Kim and Brian, might have a comment on storm surge and high tides. The storm surge is particularly important, right, when in an intense, like in a hurricane, right, or storms.
Right.
Well, that's why it's called storm surge, right? And
I mean, that's when, that's when the damage is done, is when you get these big storm surges.
That's one,
and when you get
that is some of the damage. Yes.
So,
right. Okay.
Just a thought to think about.
Yep.
I'll take moderator's privilege and just add that I think in expanding a campaign, you would need to customize your definition of which part of sea level rise is affecting that state the most, because it's not always going to be, it may be just intrusion. So, I think it's a messaging issue that may have an umbrella under which there are specific references to the particular impacts that affect whatever actor you're asking to mobilize in response. So those are good issues to raise, Mike. We're going to Aria, who, as many of you know, is a resident of Florida, so she can speak from personal experience as well as her knowledge.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you so much, Rafe. I was really glad to see that you were going to be presenting, and so glad you brought so much crew along with you as well. So my question really has to do with who you're collaborating with at this point in time. I'm really curious, for instance, if Clio has been involved with this, and if there are conversations that are happening about that. I know they've been expanding their advocacy arm in terms of policy. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that in terms of what kind of allies there are on the ground here.
Right. Good question. Allies in Florida, Kim and Brian would be better able to speak to that. I can say something about the adventures I've had elsewhere trying to find additional allies after they're done.
Okay, I'd be curious to hear about that too, for sure.
I'll mention real quick, since you brought up Clio, that Susan Glickman, who's a vice president with the Clio Institute, has been involved with this project since the inception, and since even before she joined the Clio Institute. And Rethink, in partnership with a lot of other organizations, does a lot of work. Right now, the Upper Limit Project is not a huge coalition, but we're looking to grow it.
Okay, awesome. And then also, yeah, go ahead, Rafe.
No, we've done a bunch of briefings of different organizations in Florida. One of the church groups, the League of Women Voters, Sierra Club. We have not. We're still working it to galvanize to bring this together. you know? So we're not there yet. Now,
There are go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just curious, the climate reality groups that are here as well, that might be a way in, the local climate reality, like I know Gainesville's got a large constituency, I believe. And then maybe work up from there.
Yeah. I don't know that we're doing that yet, but we could. If maybe you could pull us to get together with them. If we're not.
Sure.
Yeah, Kim just embraced your idea. So that's good.
Awesome. And then one more thing, the American Sustainable Business Council. I'm wondering about them as a potential ally.
Well, we can try. We just have to sit down and see if they would be interested in embracing this approach. I just say that I've had I had some attempt with the Indo-Pacific Island Nations big conference they had on the east side of Manhattan during Climate Week. Went there. I've been with senators from a couple of U.S. senators from coastal states with their staff. See if we can find some Senate leadership. I think it's a really good opportunity for a politician to put something like this on the table. But, I've often thought this is an obvious thing to do, but it takes some selling and some time.
Thank you. We move on to Grant Taylor.
Sure.
Good. So two things are, Rafe. First of all, I think that's really important, as you say, to use impacts on a local level to drive policy. Of course, if we're talking about the global issue or talking about global communication, there's multiple issues. Like right now in India, you have an extraordinary heat wave just happening right now, which is destroying crops and just we're getting killer heat waves. So I think we have to connect the key issues together. One of them is clearly sea level rise. Now, a question I have is in regards to sea level rise. Two of the big factors, of course, as you say, are the melting of the Greenland and West Antarctica ice sheets. In Greenland, you might be able to, if we bring in direct cooling, we can help stop the melting, because a lot of it is melting on the surface. It's then running through and weakening the ice sheet underneath, right? In the case of Antarctica, maybe people can help me here, but I'm a little unclear on how much of the melting of the thwaites, for example, is happening from underneath, because we've now got 25 billion atomic bombs worth of heat in the ocean, which is, this is not going to cool down for millennia, right? So we've got this long-term warming going on, and how much of it is being caused by warming air above, which is causing melt, to drip through the ice sheet and cause it to start slipping into the ocean, right? So anyway, part of the question here is clearly the modeling is incorrect. We're seeing accelerated sea level rise, and a very practical question. I mean, you were showing these estimates from IPCC and NOAA and so on like that, which are all over the map, anything from half a meter to 6 meters or 4 meters or whatever, right? And I think that we really need to get a grip on timelines and likely sea level rise, and because that's what we have to be much more focused on this and showing how the modeling is completely inaccurate and the threat is not only real and massive, but it's also fairly immediate. It's a threat that's taking place before 2050.
Good comments. On the subject of Indian heat, we in our sort of discussions about how to launch this, we talked a lot about using heat as a metric in Florida, and we're still working on that because Florida is experiencing very long, much many more days over 100 degrees, longer heat waves. So is the heat wave, is heat also a good metric? I mean, global temperature is not heat, right? So so that's a possibility. On Antarctica, it's a great question. I mean, I've been in a lot of discussions over the years about what's causing the change at Thwaites, and as I, with some of the original scientists about this, and just the first comment is that the stakes are so high for society and civilization in the fate of Antarctica that we ought to be super organized and trying to understand the dynamics and have the appropriate models for what's driving it, right? And one of the interesting things is, I put together a meeting of a guy who works on he models interventions from solar radiation management. I put him together with an Antarctic scientist, I say, you guys got to talk to each other, so to speak. I don't think much came out of that, but maybe there's a lot more. But one of the interesting things about Thwaites that I understood was that there was a change in mid-latitude. The circumpolar winds changed because of a change in the temperature gradient over the southern hemisphere. And in other words, the gradient shrank, I believe it shrank, or well, whatever, it changed and drove the westerlies down around, or circumpolar winds in Antarctica, into a new regime, which in turn brought all this warm water up from the below West Antarctica. And so it could be, this is way out of my area, but that the global warming was changing the circumpolar winds, which was in turn bringing up all this hot water under the glaciers. But it's things like that we have to understand so we know what a response is. Now, maybe I'm just way behind and people know a lot more about that now. But my only point is, the numbers that people are talking about with Antarctic ice loss are catastrophic. So that means there ought to be a response that is scaled to the potential catastrophe. And then that's why I think, you make Antarctica one of the poster childs of a campaign, maybe, because how much attention does Antarctica get? Still only infinitesimal compared to its importance.
Thank you. Dennis Garrity.
Okay. Rafe, let's see, I'll put my video on here. Rafe, congratulations. This is a terrific initiative. And I can see all sorts of opportunities for us to collaborate with you as you move forward on this. One of the things I was particularly intrigued about was the prospect that you could join us in our outreach to countries that have a particular problem with sea level rise. I live in the Philippines, enormous problem here. The city of Manila, 25 million people in an extremely flood prone area. The small island states you've already mentioned. Robert Tulip and I and some other colleagues in HPAC are beginning a strategy to reach out to the Association of Small Island States. And I just wanted to bring out the possibility of our having an offline conversation to actually scope out how sea level rise goal may be a very an excellent way of mobilizing these countries to raise their voice, as you've already mentioned.
Fantastic. Absolutely. I agree with, of course, I agree with you. But I would, my colleagues and I would be, I think, delighted to talk offline about possibilities. And I mean, when you mention the Philippines, so the Philippine government should be front and central on this. in the, you know,
Yes, should be,
Right.
but
well, maybe they'd take it on.
as with most governments these days, they're very, very cautious about taking any position outside of the UNFCCC. So, so that's
Well, you
our
can,
challenge. Yeah,
you can,
yeah.
you can,
Yeah,
bring
yeah.
this to the COP. It can be a proposal within the COP context.
Yes, exactly,
Absolutely.
exactly. Let's put our heads together on this, Rafe. This is
Okay.
exciting. Very, very
Great.
exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sam? You need to unmute.
I'm a newcomer to this group, and I appreciate being allowed to participate. Thank you all.
Welcome.
I've talked with Rafe about this pretty intensively over the last few weeks when we had a discussion, started out with a discussion of what this is about. I have one thing to add. First of all, I guess I would agree with Mike McCracken that storm surge should be part of a calculation. And I also think that coastal subsidence should be part of the calculation. And I think, and I say this both from a scientific standpoint, it seems to me that it's the interaction of those things, the cumulative reinforcing effect of those three things together that is making the danger much greater than we think of when we just think of a 2-foot sea level rise. And I say, so I think that substantively we have there's some work you might want to do, or finding out about subsidence. I saw something, there was a conference, there was a panel at COP28 about coastal subsidence, which cited a couple of reports on the subject and some projects about this that might be worth exploring. And I think I have the details from if I can find it again, on the internet. The other point I want to make is from a political standpoint. I mean, I've been involved in I've been a lobbyist at times, and I've worked with Congress on behalf of the State Department for a while. And so, I mean, I'm attuned to this kind of issue. It seems to me that sea level rise has two problems, just talking about sea level rise by itself. One is it's too simple. It doesn't address all the issues, and it doesn't get people's attention the way something is that you say, you know, there's some things to think about here. There's several things happening that work together. One is increased storm surge. The other is coastal subsidence. And the level of the sea is measuring it by how many feet above the coastline. Today's coastline doesn't tell you everything you need to know, and I'm sure. So as I mentioned that partly as a logical sort of thing that might get their attention, but I also think it raises. There are things that can be done about some of these things. All right, there are things that can be done about coastal subsidence. There are things that can be done about raising cities. Literally raising buildings. I don't know if anybody has read Kim Stanley Robinson's book, New York 2140, when he talks about how the bottom halves of all the buildings in New York are now below sea level, but they're still being used, okay, because that makes economic sense. And I think that. And there are things you can do about subsidence, and there are things you can do about storm surge that are different, and they raise different issues in terms of remediation and resilience kinds of projects. So I think that, and I think we might get different numbers. And there's been some mention of modeling. I would add that these models, I haven't looked at the models, I don't know them. But unless they're not only accounting for the current rate of change, but also for the rate at which the rate changes, they aren't capturing the whole picture. And I don't know who are the scientists that should be looking into that, but the point is that we know the rate is accelerating. We know the rate is going to keep accelerating because the atmosphere is warmer, because the ocean is warmer, and so I think it would be nice to be able to say, yes, the rate is, 3/4 of an inch a year right now, or every 5 years, but 10 years from now, it's going to be 1.5 inches. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't have any data. I don't have any basis for saying that. But that's the kind of thing that could also help get people's attention. It sort of seems to me it's the second derivative. It's the rate of change of the rate that we're interested in, which is something we can point at as something we might control more if we take appropriate actions. So I've talked more than I should. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Welcome, Sid.
Thank you very much, and thank you all, Rafe. I haven't seen you for a long time. Thank all of you for what you're doing. My view is that the global warming and sea level rise is a small part of the failure of humanity to commit to the long-term future. A lot of friends of myself, and myself included, don't feel we have one, unless we make some much bigger changes than just dealing with the global warming, which is critical. We have an overpopulation problem. We have a species extinction problem. We have a pandemics problem. We have a nuclear weapons problem. And what we're missing is the global culture, in my opinion, is a realization of the wonder of our existence and treating the planet and one another in accordance with that miracle. Thank you.
Thank you, Sid. I think we all agree with what you just said. So thank you for your comments. Robert, Chris.
Yes, I missed the first few minutes of the presentation, but I will catch up with those later, I hope. Yeah, Rafe, one of the things that I find really fascinating about this topic is the question of ports, because by definition, all ports are coastal. Well, apart from the few inland ones, but they're coastal. And also they are critical in the global economy. And we've seen in this last few days, this tragic event in Baltimore, how quickly a port can stop functioning and the impact that has. And it seems to me that one of the things that one needs to give considerable thought to is how ports generally, because of course, again, they would largely globally be affected by sea level rise more or less at the same time. What sort of contingencies do they have in place? What sort of vulnerabilities do they have? You know, at a small level, one assumes that robustness would be okay. That, you know, to a small storm surge or sea level rise, they could deal with that by some mechanism. And then you get to slightly more, and you're talking about resilience. So if something has been knocked over, how quickly can they recover from it? And then you get to the question of adaptation, because the port itself becomes more or less permanently flooded or regularly flooded. And these are not installations that you can quickly move or raise in their height. So I'm wondering whether your exploration of this area has given any particular thought to the vulnerability of ports and the impact that could have on global trade.
I think if we were, as we get deeper into this, no pun intended, that the question of ports and impacts and their futures and how all this is going to go, because ports could be allies in advocacy on this issue. And I know that so I would assume there are plenty of conversations going on, and maybe, you know, if we really get off the ground in a big way, that will become a part of it. And I'm just thinking Norfolk, which has always been a place where the sea level rise issue has been big. There's a naval base there, but I'm assuming, I don't know, Brian or Kim, do you have any thoughts about Florida ports?
Well, I know we have done some initial outreach to some of the ports here in Florida just to start those conversations. But I do think it's an interesting question to even think about that global, that impact to the global trade. That's something that we haven't really considered as deeply as we could, as you say. So definitely this whole conversation is giving me some things to think about. I've been taking notes. Thank you all.
Another thing about the ports is that they are organized with a port commission that is a politically appointed body. So it's an entree to the political system and a higher authority in terms of advocacy. So I think it has very many merits in terms of both the economic impact as well as what their engagement might mean to strengthening the advocacy mobilization. Happy Posey.
Suzanne, can I just
Chris,
add?
did you follow up? Robert, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just a real quickie. Following last week's session, I had a word with Hugh Hunt, who many of you are familiar with, a professor at Cambridge University. Particularly, he's a fellow at Trinity College in Cambridge. Now, many of you may not know that the university colleges in the UK are huge landowners. And one of the properties that Trinity College owns is Felixstowe, which is the UK's largest container port. And so I have asked Hugh, and he's already initiated this, to find out from the management of Felixstowe Port what contingency plans, if any, they have got in consideration of prospect of sea level rise. And it'll be interesting to find out what emerges from that in due course.
Great, yeah. Robert, that's super information. Hey, Kathy.
Greetings, everyone. And thank you. I want to reiterate my thanks because this has helped me think of so many things as well. I have the privilege, because I'm married to a State Department person, of living in the Marshall Islands for 2 years and until summer of 2025. And so in talking about small island states that are very vulnerable to sea level rise, the Marshall Islands is a coral atoll. Well, it's coral atolls. Half the population lives on Majuro, which is the capital city is on Majuro Atoll. And about 80% is 80% of the land, what little there is a meter or less above sea level. So, it's one of those first to disappear countries, really. So this is profoundly important to the Marshall Islands. And I appreciate the way, of course, they always do think about sea level rise in the Marshall Islands, but I'm not sure that their messaging campaign has been very effective when they take this to COP, which they did have a pretty large group go to COP, I think almost 30 people. Among them was the now current president. We just got a new president in January in the Marshall Islands, Hilda Heine. She left in protest because of the leadership at COP and the fossil fuel connections, but her daughter stayed, who is quite an environmentalist. And so I would be interested in joining those of you who want to reach out to the Island Pacific, small island states and so forth, because I think I could help connect at least the Marshall Islands to a group of people that, to your group that cares deeply about this. And perhaps then Hilda Heine as president, if she buys in, then she certainly has many other connections in the region. So just a thought there.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to ask, let me just say for 1 second, I'm going to ask Rafe and Brian and Kim because I know you've generated a lot of thought here and probably a lot of follow-up thought. So if you could put in your emails and where you would like people to contact you with their ideas and their offers of support and connection. Rafe, you had a comment.
Or Brian, if you can put in my email with yours, that'd be great. Or Yeah, I would just say that the power of the president of the Marshall Islands might be magnified hugely by taking this on. The messaging, the alliances. I mean, we don't know, but for sure. But it seems to me that how do you say no? How do you say no to all the islands that are, and we have been doing that, but the case hasn't been put hard enough. How do you know the rest of the world going to say no? Well, if you force them to actually deal with the issue rather than a different metric, which is global temperature, we can all dance around it. So I would say that the island states, the Indo-Pacific states, may have a huge untapped political potential. That's my guess. I'm not sure, I don't know if that's right, but it's certainly worth trying. So thank you for your comment. I too was a State Department person, so there.
We have a few of those here, I think.
Right.
So thank you, Kathy, and thank you. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. Drew.
Hi, evening all. I speak having had a 20-odd year career in ports and marina development. And last week I was in a meeting discussing climate impacts on Venice and the sea level rise impacts there. One of the things that came out of that discussion was ports, following the money, focus. We decided that we would look around the world at particularly vulnerable ports, which is particularly river delta ones. Port authorities have a huge amount of information. They have already, all of them, been tracking a certain amount of sea level rise. And they will be making assessments. Those areas are particularly vulnerable, and the buildings around them, the towns around them are very vulnerable. And they are, to a great extent, becoming aware that there will be huge cost implications, as will the insurance companies surrounding them. Those sort of city infrastructures have huge bearings on the economy because their financing is all based on the asset base of the properties that are around them. So if you want to have develop power in this and gather funding, my suggestion would be that you look at particularly vulnerable ports and try and join them together, point out to them that they are sharing similar problems, and see if you can join the dots between the impacted insurance companies and see if you can galvanize interest in a global study of the biggest and most vulnerable ports. And if you can get them working together, then you might develop some real power in the argument. And I think one of the things that they're not necessarily aware of, because they do tend to pipe back to the standard literature, is the exponential nature of sea level rise. Even on the graphs that Rafe has just shown, one of those was, it starts off exponential, but those curves seem to straighten out. And actually, I believe that within the 10, 15, 20-year horizon, we've got significant financial impact coming in very, very fast. And the timeline to act, once you point that out, is really short, because to plan, redesign, finance it, and implement it, you really have very, very little spare time at all. So I think taking those key messages forward and joining the dots is something we could usefully do. The group Equity for Humanity in Geneva have been working on some of this Mediterranean side, and maybe I can make some connections if what I'm saying makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the Delta ports, in other words, there are certain characteristics of ports, some of which are much more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in the short run, and they're facing these, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you can get 5, 6, 7, 10 of them together,
Yeah, they're powerful political
put up a couple of £100,000, you could get a really good study done and have something to slam down in front of people, and then rattle the insurance companies. The insurance companies can then start insisting they take action, before the cost becomes impossible, or before these issues become uninsurable, and then it gets much harder.
Thank you.
Very good. Good suggestion.
Since we were talking about him when he was gone, or he was not here, I'm going to introduce Hugh Hunt and Robert Chris, if you can catch us up on the little conversation that we had that referenced Hugh before he joined us. Robert, there you
Sorry,
go.
I'm not sure what you're asking me to do. Apologies.
Well, just what I think it's only fair that we enlightened him on what reference we made to him and the possibility that he might have some information about ports, and that would be helpful in this conversation.
Well, I will do that. Absolutely, I will.
Thank you.
Of course.
So you want to go ahead and do it now, please?
Well, I spoke to Hugh. I spoke to Hugh about this last week.
Okay.
And I spoke to him again about it last night.
Okay.
And he has already spoken to a young lady who works at Trinity, who is ex-McKinsey, and who has a responsibility in the college for how can I put this, for greening their estate, because one of the other
I've got
things.
some more information, Robert, on this, because I spoke today. So the port of Felixstowe in the UK is it the biggest container port in the UK? If not the biggest, it's close to it. And I asked a question today about whether sea level rise was a threat to the port. And the answer I got back was the port is probably fine. The real problem, all the roads and railways in behind the port. And that the roads and railways behind the port, for perhaps 10, 20 miles behind the port, are all very close to sea level. And sea level rise won't affect the port so much, but will enormously affect the infrastructure that leads to and from the port. And that is unfortunately not actively part of the port's concern, but the infrastructure which belongs to the government, to the state, has to be kept functioning. So it's a different question.
Super. Thank you for the update. Ron.
Thank you, Suzanne. I just wanted to get people's attention on the letter a bunch of us have signed and sent to the International Maritime Organization to revise or take a new look at the bunker fuel regulations that have caused, based on numerous studies, the most recent, one of the most recent, Jim Hansen, who estimates a full watt per meter squared jump in global warming simply as a result of bunker fuel regulations in 2020 and 2014, I believe. But anyway, the details are in the letter. I put it in the chat, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because it does unite many of the topics we're talking about: the need for urgent direct climate cooling, what we can do about it, and the reach out to the small island states in particular who are going to be affected by sea level rise. We got that letter to the General Secretary of the IMO. They responded and said they were going to review it at their most recent Marine Environment Protection Committee meeting in March in London. The reports I've gotten from that is that representatives of the Global South, and I didn't go through the list in detail to determine, but I imagine including small island state representatives who have standing with the IMO, basically doubled down on fossil fuel, on cutting emissions, which is great. I mean, we all support that, to switch over to non-greenhouse gas emissions fuel, because these ships, they use currently fossil fuel, bunker fuel with sulfur scrubbers or whatever. And in our letter, we say, if you're going to use these new fuels, why don't you also replace the sulfates that have been cooling the planet, and trying to do something about this termination shock, the unintended termination shock that's been caused by these regulations. We have an emergency proposal to just relax the regulations over the high seas, where they have very much less impact on human health. And there's at least one study that actually modeled that and looked at the difference of like 10,000 lives that anyway, it's a quite a small percentage of the human health effects. So this is just something I wanted to bring up, so that when I try and reach out to some of the people on in the chat, because it's very frustrating that small, and particularly countries that are going to be directly impacted by these kind of events are just kind of focused on emissions reduction only, which is not going to help us in the short run at all, really. That will take a long time, and that's part of course, what HPAC has been saying, and I think Rafe and others have been talking about that as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Hi, thanks. Yes, Rafe, that was an excellent presentation. I just want to comment on ways to improve the general marketing of the cause. And if you have an audience of mixed scientific skill, and training, you may want to add some more interesting slides to stimulate, in this case, what it might be like to have to walk around in Florida on 2 feet of sea level rise. And then additionally, in general, you have this is a meme, and you have this idea of how the presentation can be either too scientific and people get whatever, sad or something, but they can really enjoy a somewhat entertaining, version of the material that's made more, palatable. So just a quick comment on the marketing aspect of it.
Well, let me expand Jonathan's comments to say he's actually working on a whole portfolio of these kinds of graphics that we hope to access through the Direct Climate Cooling Advocacy Task Force that would enliven our presentations and perhaps make them more attention grabbing. So Jonathan, why don't you go ahead and put your email into the chat so that anyone that wants to connect with you further on the graphic presentations can reach out.
Great, will do.
Thank you. Dennis.
Yes, Suzanne, I just wanted to alert you that it seems that the chat has disappeared. There's only one entry. There was a whole bunch of entries in the chat, but they've all disappeared on my screen. I wonder if it's been deleted or something.
It hasn't been deleted, and I am not the master of the Zoom today. So
I have an input there. I too was puzzled earlier, and it seems like where yes, it seems like where you find the chat is sort of midway, and so tap things farther up in the queue, and you might find the whole thing. And I've been archiving the chat because I do that.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Because yeah, we'll want to get those email addresses.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So I don't see any more hands up. So Rafe, Kim, or Brian, did you have any issues you wanted to raise or follow up that you wanted to talk about in terms of next steps for your campaign and your activities, and how people in this group might support your efforts?
Well, I would just for ourselves, I think if we've got the email addresses out there, and if people have specific ideas of how they might want to move this forward, and we can be helpful or vice versa, we can do that. Examples of, I think the idea of the ports is interesting and important. Philippines, Marshall Islands, a lot of better marketing. All those and more that came up today are the question is whether people are interested in trying to move those. Our effort is limited in personnel and so on. So, but if we can be helpful in moving something forward within some context of, take a government or the port commissions or whomever, we can do that. We have materials, we have people who know the issue and have talked about this as a kind of substantive political initiative.
I mean, I think that you probably, if people would raise their hands, that you would find that there's a lot of interest and support for the direction that you're heading.
Well, that's really, I tell you, it helps us. It gives us some reinforcement too, that people, there's interest, understanding, and so on.
Yes. Is there any other question or comment that anybody wants to make before we adjourn this meeting? I will tell you what I intend to do, which is I will gather the chat and I will share that as well as Rafe's presentation to the HPAC group. And I will also be posting the recording of this conversation, which will be publicly available, to which you all have access and permission to reuse. So we can take advantage of the thinking that went on today and interconnect also our larger DCC climate cooling effort. And so I know that Dennis will be connecting with Rafe and following up there. So I encourage you all to maintain these connections and pursue them. And anyone that has any questions or follow-up comments that wants to share them with me, I'm happy to receive your emails, which I will promptly put in here. And thank you so much for attending and offering your comments. Any last words, Rafe?
Just an appreciation to you, Suzanne, for making this happen and your generosity and help. Couldn't do it without you, for sure.
Thanks. It's all good. I appreciate working with all of you. Thank you so much. Okay, watch the space and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks very much, Rafe.
Oh, Suzanne,
bye-bye.
Do you want
good to see you.
SC to meet or?
Yeah, SC members can stay on. Hugh, thank you for joining us today.
No problem. See you later.
Okay, take care. Okay, here we are. Robert is engaged in another meeting that he said was going to take an hour and a half. So he may or may not be able to join us, but he is watching the platform. He's been managing it, multitasking. So what have you got?
Suzanne, you might want to use, I think Lenore is probably not on her.
I have no control of what I'm saying.
Oh, it's Robert. Okay. Whatever. It's probably, anyway, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dennis.
I still was unable to access the rest, the most of the chat. It appears, I don't know. Well, hopefully Leslie could.
Well, let me tell you what I do. It's pretty simple. It was just where I finally found the place where I could do the save chat was right next to the words Healthy Planet Action Coalition. So it's like midway down the stack, and it isn't protesting as I save the chat. So I'm thinking that it gives me a chat saved with a check mark. So you could do the same thing. Anybody who's in this could do the same thing.
No, what happens is that
Suzanne, you might want to
Robert's here.
stop the recording.
Oh, okay.